Imagine trying to calculate the exact nutritional macros for an elite athlete.
Right.
And, timing this brutal transit schedule across a city with basically broken infrastructure.
Yeah, total nightmare.
Totally. And doing all of that while maintaining an atmosphere of just total Zen-like calm.
Oh, and operating entirely alone on a single-parent working-class budget.
Exactly. Which is just, it's wild to even think about, because when we look out onto a field or a court or even just, into a high-stakes boardroom, and we see a true titan in their element.
Someone just operating with that absolute terrifying calm under pressure.
Right. We have this reflex to just credit their innate talent. We look at them and think, they were just born with ice in their veins.
Yeah, that's just magic.
But today, we're completely flipping that lens. We're looking away from the spotlight and focusing on the shadows, on the invisible architecture of greatness.
Because we are so easily mesmerized by the final product, right? We see the grace, the execution, the result on the world stage.
Yeah.
But we rarely, if ever, stop to analyze the incredibly dense and often painful foundation that makes that execution physically and psychologically possible.
So true.
So today's deep dive is really going to challenge how you think about resilience. We're working with this profoundly moving set of notes and character profiles centered on a single mother, Sheila Ebana, and her son, Lamine.
And the sources we have stacked up here are just fascinating. We're unpacking the hidden, agonizing sacrifices of single motherhood.
Yeah, the real granular stuff.
Exactly, the actual granular psychology of how discipline is transferred from parent to child, and also the heavy sociological symbolism of their specific working-class neighborhood.
Right, Rocafonda.
Rocafonda, specifically the area code 304.
And I want to ground this conversation right from the start because, this isn't just a heartwarming, feel-good story about a mother's love.
No, not at all.
Because if we treat it as just some greeting card sentiment, we're doing the material and the harsh reality of their lives a massive disservice.
Right, it minimizes it.
Exactly. This is a sociological and psychological blueprint. We're analyzing this through the lens of historical toughness. It's a study of how extreme environmental scarcity literally forces a psychological adaptation.
And how that adaptation is encoded and passed down. So whether you are currently trying to navigate a major project with severely limited resources, or you're just a curious mind trying to understand the actual roots of true mental resilience.
I think we all are.
Yeah, right. This deep dive is essentially a masterclass in how everyday, unglamorous grit is the exact material used to build extraordinary legacies.
It is the mechanics of greatness, just completely stripped of all the usual mythology.
Okay, let's unpack this from the ground up. Because before we can even begin to understand the psychological strength that Lamine displays when he's out there competing, we first have to establish the physical and logistical reality that his mother navigated just to get him to that starting line.
The daily grind.
Right, and our sources are very explicit about that grind. We are talking about Sheila Ebana working tirelessly and, most importantly, entirely alone.
Which is the key factor here.
It is. Honestly, I read the daily schedule detailed in these sources, and I felt my heart rate spike just looking at the page.
Oh, absolutely.
I can barely coordinate my own breakfast and a morning commute without a minor panic attack, let alone engineer the physical development of a world-class talent.
Well, the sheer isolation is the defining factor of her logistics.
Mm-hmm.
There is no backup system.
Right.
In a typical middle class or, affluent environment, raising an athlete involves a massive relay team.
Oh yeah, coaches, carpool.
Industrialized nutritionists, maybe an extended family network to hand the baton to when a parent gets tired.
Yeah.
Sheila had no relay team. She was the entire infrastructure.
Yeah, she's a single mother managing a logistical mountain. She had to ensure Lamine made it to practice on time every single time crossing a city.
Yep.
She had to make sure he received highly specific, proper nutrition. And anyone who has looked at the price of high-quality protein and fresh produce...
Oh, it's astronomical.
Right. Knowing how to manage elite athletic nutrition is incredibly difficult and expensive when your budget is already stretched to the breaking point.
And doing that every single day.
Exactly. And on top of that, she had to keep him focused on his dreams while battling a severe systemic lack of facilities in their area. It makes me think of a structural analogy.
Yeah.
It's like a massive suspension bridge. Lamine is the road smooth, level, moving beautifully, getting you to the destination. but Sheila is the massive network of tension cables underneath.
I like that.
Groaning under thousands of tons of invisible force, absorbing all the wind and weight so the road itself never buckles or sways.
That captures the dynamic perfectly, because the tension is entirely underneath the surface, completely hidden from the cars driving over it.
But here's where I have to push back a little bit on a common assumption we make when we hear these types of stories.
Yeah.
We always throw around the phrase supportive parent to describe anyone who drives a kid to practice.
Right. It's a very broad term.
But think about the sheer nightmare of managing nutrition, incredibly tight schedules, and limited neighborhood facilities single-handedly. How does that actually shape the outcome for a kid?
That's the real question.
Because honestly, isn't there a massive risk of the child just absorbing the toxic stress of that daily scramble?
Oh, absolutely.
You'd think growing up in a pressure cooker of like, hurry up, the bus is late, we have no money, eat this quickly before practice, would make a child incredibly anxious, hyper-reactive, and frantic, not calm.
Well, what's fascinating here is that you are hitting on the exact psychological danger of poverty. Chronic stress in a household usually does bleed into a child's psychology.
Biologically.
Yes,
right.
biologically.
Yeah.
Growing up in a high-stress, low-resource environment floods a developing brain with cortisol.
Wow.
It creates a state of permanent hypervigilance. Kids in those environments learn to constantly scan for threats because the adults around them are constantly panicked.
That makes total sense. So why didn't that happen here?
Because the sources point to a radically different mechanism at play with Sheila. She wasn't just providing physical resources like food and transportation. She was actively manufacturing a protective buffer.
Wait, so she isn't just ignoring the chaos, she's actively hoarding the stress. She's processing all the panic about the logistics internally, so he literally never sees it.
Think of it like a logistical Faraday cage.
A Faraday cage?
Yeah, in physics, a Faraday cage completely blocks electromagnetic fields. Lightning can strike it, a storm can rage all around it, but whatever is inside is completely untouched by the electricity.
Oh, wow.
The storm of poverty, the broken municipal facilities, the sheer bone-deep exhaustion of the single-parent hustle that is a storm raging constantly around their family.
And she's the cage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sheila didn't just hold Lamine's hand and walk him through the storm, she became the cage. By absorbing the chaos of their environment entirely onto her own shoulders, she neutralized the stress before it could breach his environment.
She didn't let the scramble become his problem. I mean, he didn't know how hard it was to get the groceries. He just knew the meal was there.
Right. She provided Lamine with the single most critical and often most expensive resource a developing talent can have.
Which is?
Uninterrupted space.
Ah.
Because she took on the entire cognitive load of their survival. The budgeting, the timing, the problem-solving. Lamine's cognitive load was freed up.
That is incredible.
He could focus purely, 100%, on his dream. He didn't have to worry about how they were getting to practice or if there was enough food to fuel his muscles.
Or how to navigate around the broken fields.
Right. He just had to execute. She basically subsidized his mental clarity with her own physical and mental exhaustion.
Subsidizing his mental clarity with her own exhaustion. Man, that is heavy.
It really is.
But, being inside a Faraday cage is only half the equation because he is still in there with her, watching her operate. The sources pivot from the physical logistics to how that specific type of parental hardship translated into the child's mental state permanently. Like, how did her struggle actually forge his strength?
Wow.
Because a kid who is just protected from the world usually becomes fragile, right? Not formidable.
Right. It wasn't just the fact that she was shielding him.
Yeah.
The secret lies in what she modeled for him while she was shielding him.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Because the sources state that the discipline Sheila applied was born directly from the harshness of life as a single parent.
Yeah.
It wasn't some abstract discipline she picked up in a modern parenting book. It was visceral survival discipline.
Pure survival.
And the text explicitly says that this exact discipline became the DNA of Lamine's calmness on the field. They even take it a step further.
The historical comparison.
Yeah. They compare her mental strength and grit to a very specific historical figure. They draw a direct parallel to how a Roman emperor lead.
Which is a brilliant, highly deliberate comparison for the authors of these sources to make. It completely reframes our entire understanding of what toughness looks like.
Yeah, but I have to ask, because the psychology of this seems totally counterintuitive to me.
How so?
How does the brutal harshness of a single mother's life translate into calm execution for the son? Like I said before, usually hardship creates erratic survival instincts.
Right.
It's like a stray dog that has had a hard life on the streets. It isn't calm, it's jumpy, it startles at loud noises. It is hyper-reactive because reactivity keeps it alive.
That's a great point.
So how does the crucible of single motherhood create stoic calmness instead of a reactive survival instinct?
Well, if we really unpack that Roman emperor analogy from the sources, the mechanism of this psychology becomes crystal clear.
Okay, let's unpack it.
When we think of a Roman emperor, specifically the Stoic leaders like Marcus Aurelius, we aren't thinking of a chaotic warlord who relies on erratic survival instincts.
No, we think of philosophy and strategy.
Exactly. A Stoic leader does not panic when resources run dry. They do not lash out or throw a tantrum when the enemy is at the gates. They operate with an extreme, highly methodical discipline.
They assess the reality no matter how grim or overwhelming, and they execute the necessary steps.
Right. Without emotional leakage.
Emotional leakage, yes. They don't let the panic bleed out into the room and infect everyone else.
That is the core of it. Now, apply that stoicism to Sheila Ebana in Rocafonda. When she is facing a lack of money at the end of the month, a lack of local facilities, a lack of time, she is not exhibiting erratic, jumpy survival instincts.
She isn't screaming at the unfairness of it all.
No, she's exhibiting methodical discipline. She's calculating the exact minutes needed to get on a bus to cross town for practice. She is rationing the exact nutrients needed for his performance based on the cash she has.
Oh, wow.
She modeled this immense stoic discipline every single day. Lamine didn't inherit erratic stress because he never saw erratic stress. He saw a general commanding an army of one.
He inherited the system his mother used to defeat the stress.
I see. That's exactly.
This is what the sources mean by the DNA of calmness. It's not biological DNA. It's a transferred psychological framework. It's like an operating system on a computer.
That is a perfect way to conceptualize it. Children are the ultimate observers.
They really are.
They rarely internalize what we tell them to do, but they meticulously mimic how we behave when the pressure is on.
So when Lamine is out there on the field facing thousands of screaming fans, the weight of immense expectations and a ticking clock, he doesn't panic.
He doesn't even know how.
Right. His brain doesn't know how to panic in that scenario because his foundational understanding of how to handle high stakes was forged by watching his mother handle the literal life or death pressure of daily survival.
Yeah.
His calmness on the field is just the physical manifestation of his mother's daily survival strategy.
He's literally booting up Sheila software. And that software was coded in the absolute harshest conditions of single motherhood in a tough neighborhood.
It is unbreakable because it was designed to survive reality, not just a game.
Exactly. When a defender is rushing at him, his brain processes it the way his mother processed a missed bus or a late bill.
Yeah.
Here's a high-stress variable. We do not panic, we calculate, and we execute.
But you can't engineer a kid like this in a vacuum. A family operating with that kind of machine-like, stoic, focused people are going to notice.
Oh, definitely.
It doesn't stay a private family secret for long, especially in a neighborhood where everyone is living elbow to elbow. So now that we understand the internal psychological bond between mother and son, this transfer of stoic discipline, we have to zoom out.
Right. Look at the macro level.
We need to look at how this private triumph impacts the broader society watching them.
And the sources are incredibly intentional about the setting here. They don't just wave a hand and say they lived in a tough town.
Right, they name it.
They specifically name the working-class neighborhood of Rocafonda, and they highlight the area code 304.
It becomes a character in the story. Rocafonda 304 isn't just a backdrop, it is the terrain they had to conquer.
Yeah.
And the sources point out that Sheila Ebana has become a potent symbol of hope for this community. Her story is held up as definitive proof that a single mother, despite immense odds, can raise a world titan.
A titan.
But put yourself in the shoes of someone living in that neighborhood, watching this unfold.
Right.
I actually want to challenge the wording the sources use here.
Okay, go for it.
Calling Lamine a titan. In classical mythology, titans are these massive primal deities that carry the literal weight of the cosmos on their backs.
Yeah.
Does framing him as a titan and elevating his mother to a literal symbol of hope place an unfair, almost mythological burden on a single family?
That's a deep question.
Are we stripping them of their human struggles just to make a gritty neighborhood feel better about itself?
Well, this raises an important question, right? That is one of the most critical sociological debates we can have when analyzing narratives of exceptionalism. It is a massive burden to call someone a titan.
It really is.
But we have to look at why that label is applied and who is applying it. In places like Rocafonda, with limited facilities, chronic underfunding, and massive systemic barriers, the narrative of the neighborhood is almost entirely dictated from the outside.
And that outside narrative is a deficit narrative.
Exactly.
It's a list of what they lack, what they can achieve, and the statistics that prove they're going to fail. It is a self-fulfilling prophecy designed by Zip's code.
Yes, because systemic barriers enforce a narrative of limitation. The world tells the residents of 304 that their environment only produces struggle.
Right.
What Sheila and Lamine did was violently disrupt that sociological math.
Disrupt the math. I like that.
By succeeding at the absolute highest level, by raising the so-called Titan, she proved something mathematically undeniable to her community. She proves that a working-class environment is not exclusively a place of hardship and limitation.
It can actually act as a crucible for greatness.
Exactly. It goes back to that idea of the forge you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, the neighborhood isn't just a place that beats you down and breaks you. It can be the extreme heat that tempers the steel.
And for the people living in Rocafonda 304, Sheila transcends the role of just being Lamine's mother. She becomes a tangible, breathing blueprint.
Wow.
She proves to an entire social class that their unseen struggles, the late nights, the skipped meals, the logistical nightmares of navigating broken transit systems, they have immense world-shifting value.
So it's a validation.
Total validation.
Sure.
When a single parent in that neighborhood is exhausted, they can look at Sheila and realize, my struggle is not evidence of my failure. It is the raw material of my child's future strength.
That is incredibly powerful because it entirely recontextualizes the pain of poverty.
Right.
And importantly, it doesn't romanticize it. It doesn't claim that poverty is some beautiful, noble thing.
No, not at all.
It acknowledges the brutality, but says the grit you are forced to develop while surviving it is an undeniable superpower.
It validates the invisible sacrifices of thousands of other parents in that exact same area code. When they watch Lamine exhibit that Titan-like calm on television, they don't just see a great athlete scoring points.
They see the ultimate vindication of a working-class mother's sacrifice.
Yes, that is why the symbol is necessary for the community. It isn't a burden placed on the family. It is a shield raised for the neighborhood. It proves their existence matters.
Man, you really do not look at a sports highlight the same way after unpacking all of the mechanics beneath it.
No, you really can't.
Let's take a second to recap the journey we just went on with these sources, because we covered some incredibly deep ground here.
We did.
We started by looking past the flashy, graceful talent on the surface to expose the grueling, isolated logistics of a single mother. We explored how Sheila Ebana operated as a logistical Faraday cage,
Absorbing the shock and chaos of limited resources so her son could have uninterrupted pure focus.
Right. She subsidized his mental space with her own exhaustion. Then we dove into the psychology of how that harsh Roman emperor-like discipline didn't make Lamine an erratic, jumpy kid, but instead was psychologically encoded into him.
It became his on-field DNA of calmness.
He literally runs his mother's operating system when he is under fire. And finally, we zoomed all the way out to Rocafonda 304, seeing how this intensely private, gritty sacrifice elevated Sheila into a public monument.
A real symbol of hope.
She proved that a working-class crucible doesn't just crush people. It can forge a global titan.
It is a remarkable synthesis of personal grit and profound sociological impact. And honestly, it forces a very specific kind of introspection for anyone who studies it.
And that introspection is exactly where we want to leave you, the listener, today. We've spent this entire deep dive talking about titans, and we've talked about the invisible architects that build them from the ground up.
Right. Consider this as you navigate the rest of your week. If Lamine's brilliant, unflappable calmness on the field is not actually his own, but is the inherited operating system of his mother's daily struggle behind the scenes, well, it forces us to look in the mirror.
Think about your own greatest strength. Think about the one trait you rely on when the pressure is highest, when the deadlines are looming, everything is going wrong, and the entire room is looking at you to fix it.
Ask yourself, is that strength really entirely your own? Or, if you look closely enough at your own history, is it the echo of an invisible sacrifice made by someone else? Someone who quietly buffered you from the chaos, absorbing the storm so that you could stand there today completely calm.